Awesome. So I'm going to get started. As people trickle in, we will welcome them, and we'll go from there. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Leung from New York City Emergency Management. Today, we are joined by a representative from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Dr. Monica Charnier, which I will do another introduction in a bit. And we are here for our February Ready Up webinar on emergency preparedness and mental health. So, just to get things started, I'm going to give everyone a little introduction of who we are at Emergency Management and a quick presentation on emergency preparedness, and then we'll dive right into mental health, mental wellness, and stress management from Dr. Monica Charnier. So, New York City Emergency Management, we are the city's interagency coordinating group. We coordinate citywide emergencies and planning and response for all types and scales of emergencies. We are staffed by more than 200 dedicated professionals with diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise, including individuals assigned from other city agencies such as the police department, the fire department, the Department of Building, Sanitation, etc. And our goal is to help New Yorkers before, during, and after emergencies through preparedness, education, and response. Now, how do we be prepared? We always want to first download the My Emergency Plan at nyc.gov/readyny. This plan is basically a handout that we usually give in-person presentations, and it really allows you to properly plan for any type of emergency that may occur. Within this plan, or within this booklet, we have three simple steps. We have the first step on how to make a plan, how to gather supplies, and how to stay informed. Making a plan really is creating the list of things that you need to do in order to be properly prepared. You want to be able to have all the right steps to be prepared for you and your family, so that you can be able to tackle any type of emergency that come your way. As you are planning for this emergency, we want you to be able to gather the right supplies or gather the right things that you need in order to properly face any type of emergency. Those things can mean from the basic necessities such as food, water, medication, to more specific things for you and the situation you're in. Such as if I have a child, I would want to have an activity or a toy for them so they can be occupied when an emergency does happen. And we also want to stay informed. We want to have the most up to date information so we are able to properly plan and prepare for any type of emergency. Staying informed is super important because it allows us to know what the next step is, either hearing updates from the government or hearing updates from family and friends that is within your emergency support network. Now, we have a more in-depth presentation about this and how to be properly prepared for emergencies on our YouTube page, and we give it throughout the community every day. But today we are really here to focus on mental health and how to deal with stress and things along those lines. So I really, really, really would love to present and introduce Dr. Monica Charnier from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and she will be our presenter today. And Doctor, you have the floor.
Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me and having me here today. And I welcome everyone to our presentation on the mental health impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I hope that what we will discuss today, you will find it helpful in your daily life, in your work life, in managing the mental health impact of these very, very challenging times. Next slide, please. So thank you for the introduction. And my name is Monica Erős-Sarnyi, and I'm a physician working at the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. My function is a best practices specialist in disaster mental health, And my soft spot, what I really care about most, is building resiliency and well-being. Because if we think about disaster preparedness, when we are resilient and when our well-being at its highest, then we have a best chance to deal and cope effectively with whatever life throws at us, including any kind of a disaster, including the current situation we are dealing with. Next slide, please. So the goal of this presentation today is really to increase awareness about the mental health impact of the current pandemic. And to this end, what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the different types of stress we likely to experience, and remind ourselves what is really happening to us when we are stressed. And also at the end, we're going to talk about what are the simple self-care strategies that can help us cope a little better with the current situation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let us start with reflecting really on the current situation, which is the pandemic. The pandemic is a public health emergency. And what really happened, the pandemic upended our plans for ourselves, for our family, for our home and work. It changed our life. It changed our life suddenly and rapidly and dramatically. It brought fear, anxiety, uncertainty, loss, and for many people brought grief and suffering. It's really changed the way how we work and live, how our children or we go to school, and how we spend time together with our family, with our friends, and even with our coworkers. And this situation really makes us feel off balance and insecure, and we are uncertain not just about ourselves, but about the future. In short, this situation is extremely stressful, and it makes us stressful. And what we need to realize when we reflect on this situation, that maybe some of us feel that we are a very strong person, we are a resilient person, we experienced many things before, that no one of us is really remain or can remain untouched by this pandemic. It is all around us. It is our daily life. Currently, it is our daily life. And the mental health impact of this situation is layered. What do I mean by this? It affects us as individuals. It can affect my health, how I think, how I feel. It can affect how I interact with my friends and family, how do I my work. It has an impact on me. It has an impact of you as an individual. But we have families, we have friends, and this situation impacts them. Maybe some of them got sick with the COVID. Some of them might have been hospitalized. Some of our friends or family members may lost their jobs and now struggling financially. Some of them maybe belong to communities and groups that have been discriminated against and also disproportionately affected by this current event. And because we care about our friends, we care about our family members, it's going to affect us at that level. And because of that, additionally. And we also belong to the community. The community can be as small as our group we go and belong to maybe a church or maybe a gym or maybe any kind of a community. It can be a larger community, but it can be a reflection on even on our country. And the pandemic affecting how we are doing things within our smaller or larger community on a country level. And because we care about these communities, it's going to have effect on our levels, on that level as well. So if we think about this really, the mental health impact of the current situation of this public health is really layered, complex, and profound. Next slide, please. So what we need to understand that at the bottom of all these layers of the mental health impact of the pandemic is really the stress caused by this current situation, by the event, the stress that we experience. And really a traumatic stress, which is different than any other kind of a stress. So let us start a little bit talking about generally about traumatic stress. When we experience traumatic stress, we face a deeply distressing event or situation that we believe that threatens our life or well-being, regardless of a pandemic. These events are traumatic events. In our regular pre-pandemic life and even a pandemic life, let's say losing a job, a divorce, losing a loved one, these are traumatic events. We do not normally experience, or just very few times throughout our lifetime, but these are traumatic events. These are not part of our everyday life, and these cause traumatic stress. Now, traumatic stress is, so to speak, a worse kind of a stress because it's really can harm us, can harm our well-being, emotional and physical health. And traumatic stress and the event that cause traumatic stress, they tend to overwhelm us, overwhelm our ability to cope with the situation, and they tend to make us feel helpless and hopeless. But we also need to recognize and realize that disasters, any kind of a disasters, are traumatic events by their very nature, because they tend to threaten our well-being, our life, our families, our communities. So they cause traumatic stress, of course. And what we also need to realize that the current pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, is a disaster. It is a biological disaster caused by a biological agent, a virus. And it is a disaster on a global scale. It is a pandemic. And because of this, the trauma is even at a different scale. It is a shared traumatic experience. It has created a shared human experience of remarkable uncertainty, isolation, and hardship. And as I mentioned before, we really have to recognize and remember that certain communities of color, has been disproportionately affected by this current event, and also their access may have been limited to cope with the current situation. Next slide, please. Now, we talked about the current situation and the unique stress that is caused, but we shouldn't forget about the basic and cumulative stress in our lives. Before the pandemic, I doubt that any one of you had a life free of stress. We experienced basic stress in our pre-pandemic life and cumulative stresses. Basic stresses pre-pandemic life are associated with getting in the morning, getting ready to go to work, helping our children to get ready to go to work, being stuck in the traffic, the hustle with getting food and resources what we need. Cumulative stress, another kind of a stress that is sometimes something that is repetitive or is always there and we have to face it. It could be related, for example, if we have a chronic medical condition and we had to go to the physical, to the checkups, to the doctors, get the medication, or maybe we have relationship problems and the issues that keep coming up. So these were the two basic types of stresses that we have been dealing, potentially many of us, even before the pandemic. With the pandemic, these stresses did not go away. If anything happened to them, they just became more complex. Our basic stresses, for example, getting our children ready for school, now became making sure that our children are sitting down in front of their computers and doing their homework while we are balancing our work from home. For cumulative stress, the example, getting our checkups, regular checkups, became more complex. Maybe we cannot go to the doctor's office. Maybe we have to do telehealth, which is unfamiliar and not the same thing. Or maybe we have to go to the office and there's a risk of exposure. So, but this means that the current situation is extremely stressful. We have the basic and cumulative stress, which we had before, now more complexly presented in our life. And on top of this, there is a traumatic stress caused and specific and unique to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So why is this important? Why do we have to think about this? Because I'm sure most of you experience one or other aspect of I just talked about. So why are we talking about this? Because we have to be really highly aware about the impact of this stress on our life, on our physical and mental health. Because stress, it does affect how we feel, how we think, and how we do things, how we act. And if you think about it, these three things are very important for us to be able to do what we have to do in our daily life, at home, at family, and at work. Next, please. Next, thank you. And also, we have to realize that stress affects how effectively we function, how effective we are in dealing with our daily responsibilities, both at home and work, and how effectively we are coping with everything we have to. And in this very challenging situation, it's really requiring us that we cope effectively. Coping effectively with our daily challenges, even before pandemic, sometimes can be difficult. And sometimes we are not that effective. During the pandemic, maybe you are a frontline worker and the responsibility on your shoulders are very, very high. So it means that you, despite of all the stress you're facing, you have to function not less effectively, but much, much more than effectively than ever before. Next one, please. So let us stop for a second and remind ourselves about stress, really the basics, so that we really connect all that what I talked about so far, all that we experienced so far, to what is stress really, and why do we need to think about it, and what is happening to us when we are stressed. In short, I'm sure we know all these things. Stress is our body's natural reaction to any situation that requires us to respond and adjust. Pandemic or no pandemic, we are constantly exposed to situations that we need to respond to. Now, when we think about this adjusting and coping and responding to, we think about our body, we know what happens. We find ourselves in the situation, our body releases the stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, all the different kind of hormones. And these hormones is going to affect our body from top to bottom. Every cell in our body, it's going to increase our blood pressure, heart rate, it's going to affect our breathing, our blood sugar level will increase. And all these changes will help us to respond, to adjust to the situation. And this actually, if we think about it, can be a good thing. For example, for me, I'm doing this presentation now, and I hope I will do a good job. It's a little bit stressful, and these stress hormones are helping me to concentrate and hopefully deliver a good presentation. For you, whatever your work is, you find yourself in a situation you have to deal with, these stress hormones will help you to get things done the way you want them to do. You want them to be done. It also helps us to protect us from dangerous situations. A very simple example would be pandemic or no pandemic. We walk down the street, we don't pay attention, and we step down from the sidewalk and the car is coming and we step back. And this is a sudden stress hormones that make sure that we that have this reaction, so it helps us safe and secure. So this kind of a stress is good, and our body is perfectly designed for this kind of a response. But if we stop for a second, we have to realize that these reactions and the requirement and the demand on our body to respond is short-lived. They can last from few seconds, few minutes, maybe hour, maybe a day at longest. And our body is designed biologically, evolutionarily, to respond to this kind of a stress. But then let's reflect on our current situation. We've been here in the pandemic for a year now almost, and the stress we just discussed has been part of our daily life. And this is nothing to do with the stress I just discussed. And this is a stress that is a prolonged, it can be extreme, it can be also sudden on top of everything. So this kind of a stress that is long, repeated, and intense, this is a not good kind of a stress. This kind of a stress can really harm us physically and mentally. And why is that? Because all those stress hormones that we have secreted to respond to stress reaction, normally after we respond to a sudden event, they go back to the low level, and the effect they produced in our body, they go down, our body calms down. When the stress is constantly there, think about it. Our blood pressure may remain higher, heart rate, the sugar level in our blood. We are trying to respond constantly, and that can lead to exhaustion. And indeed, there are lots of research that shows that chronic, lasting, intensive stress is related to many mental health and physical illnesses. Just to mention a few: depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, and alcohol and substance use disorders are very common mental health illnesses that are related to stress, specifically to traumatic stress. And from physical point of view, autoimmune illnesses, high blood pressure, and cancer, this has been all related to stress reactions. And I'm sorry, to lasting and chronic and intense stress. Next slide, please. Now, maybe you think that you're a strong person and you don't have these kind of reactions, and you went through a lot and you became a hardened person. Maybe that's the case. But what we are facing now is really unprecedented, and the stress on every and each one of us is unprecedented. And we have to accept that no one exposed to such a traumatic event as we are facing now, and usually when we are exposed to traumatic events, we will experience some kind of a stress reactions. Now, we are unique individuals. How we experience stress and what we're going to feel when we go through this reaction is really unique to us. And it also depends on our culture, what we learn. How do we talk about our stress reactions, if we talk about them at all, and what are the cultural appropriate way to express them. All this means that we all experience stress, but it is unique to us how we experience them, and there is just simply no right or wrong way to react to stress. We experience stress reactions differently, and that is normal. Next slide, please. Now, one thing is that we are aware of that we are experiencing stress reactions. And because stress, even before the pandemic, is part of our daily life, the way we react and reflect on our being stressed, maybe just saying, oh, I'm so stressed today, or maybe I'm tired or have headaches, but we don't really reflect on what is happening to us. And it's very useful to know about the reactions so we can become more aware of how we react to stress, and maybe that will give us a chance to step in sooner and do something about it and reduce it. And just remember, reducing it is important because of the harmful effect and because stress can contribute to all those different illnesses. So let's take a look at the stress reactions. They can fall into 5 big buckets: physical, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and spiritual reactions. Physical reactions is the way our body reacts when we find ourselves in a stressful situation. Again, it might be a little bit different if we are in a very acute stressful situation. Then we feel our heart pumping and our heart rate goes up, and we maybe breathe faster, and maybe our palms, or we start sweating, or maybe feel nauseous. With a chronic stress or prolonged stress, these reactions still can be there, but then other kind of symptoms may come, that we feel maybe tired, and we feel that we don't have that much energy, and we have kind of non-specific body complaints, or maybe we have headaches and backaches. Now, emotional reactions. This is what we feel when we are stressed. It can be shock and disbelief and denial. Disbelief and shock, I'm sure most of us, even now after a year, when we look around the world, what is going on as a result of this pandemic, it's hard to comprehend. But then again, sorrow or even numbness after this long time, fear, agitation, anxiety, anger, irritability, all the variation of these emotional reactions we may experiencing. And if we lost someone, or we know someone who lost a loved one, a grief and guilt can be a common reactions. Cognitive reactions. This is how our mind reacts when we find ourselves in a stressful situation. Confusion is very common. And I don't know how many, but I'm sure that most of you experience that we can have a trouble concentrating. We are not that effective anymore as we were before. And we can experience difficulties to remembering things. Or the other common thing is that we became hesitant. We are not really sure what is a good decision anymore. Now, also, if we, for example, lost a loved one, and that loved one was brought to the hospital, a flashback and intrusive images of that experience can be part of a cognitive reaction. Behavioral reactions, how we act during the stressful time. I don't know how many of you, but I heard many people saying, I don't know what's going on with me. I'm just not like acting myself. I never argued before with my children, with my spouses, with my coworkers. Now I just snap at them. Or maybe saying that or feeling that I was so active before, now I became withdrawn. And definitely the lockdown, when we were restricted, and the social distancing does not help to become more socially active and reaching out to our friends. And changing in appetite and sleep patterns, or using drugs or alcohol to cope. These are all behavior reactions. And finally, spiritual reactions. Maybe you were a person who were highly spiritual, now facing all these things, and maybe you suffered a loss and struggling a lot and questioning suddenly everything, or maybe you became even cynical, or just the opposite. You were never a person very deeply spiritual, but now faced with all this incomprehensible change in our life and stress and grief and loss, now you find yourself turned to spirituality and find a solace in the your spirituality. Now, I would like you to remember that all these reactions I mentioned, only the most common ones. And no one experiences all these reactions at the same time. And because we have been going through the pandemic for a long period of time, these reactions may come and go. They vary in their intensity. And that's absolutely normal. Next slide, please. So to summing up, what we need to remember about these reactions, that these are transient reactions. Now, the transient in the pandemic can mean a little bit different than if we are dealing with a very short-lived, stressful or traumatic event. But these reactions are actually normal. Our life now, our circumstances are not abnormal. So our reactions are going to be a little bit different than would be in our daily life before pandemic. So just remember, what you're experiencing is very likely normal response to our abnormal life situation. These reactions may appear, they, as I said, come and go, they change in intensity. And most often, they do not indicate any kind of a psychiatric disorder, although they might, but usually they don't. And the person sometimes feels that, what's going on with me? Am I going crazy? No. We are just dealing with a very, very challenging traumatic situation. And as I said before, it's easy to feel that way because all this stress is going to affect how we feel, think, act, and function. And what is the good news about this? That we are resilient and we can recover and we can cope. Yes, sometimes we might need the help of the family and our social network and people who maybe take care of us, but we can recover and we can cope with these stress reactions and with our situation. Next slide, please. Of course, the question is that, why should we monitor our stress reaction? What is the benefit of that? The benefit of that is very simple. I don't know how many of you before the pandemic, during the pandemic, stepped on the scale to check your weight. And when you see that number will tell you, okay, I'm still doing good, or one way or the other, I'm not doing good. It's kind of a signal for you. It signals that you might need to do things differently in order to get back to the weight that is healthy and good for you. It is the same way with all these stress reactions. It is a first step really to helping us to cope and manage effectively all this impact or the pandemic has on our mental health. If we are monitoring our stress reactions, then it can help us recognize when may be a problem. Now, I said that these reactions are normal reactions and they do not indicate that we are developed a psychiatric illness or we need a mental health professional. But we also have to acknowledge that sometimes anyone, me, you, any one of us can struggle and can find coping difficult. And there is a point when we should seek a professional help. Now, when is that point? How do we know that when we just said that all these reactions are normal? There's no checklist, but there's a good guidance. And that guidance is that know yourself, know your reactions, how you reacted before the pandemic to the stressful situation. And when you reflect your reactions during the pandemic, and when you realize that actually your reactions did not went away, they got actually worse over the time. And they are actually interfering with your functioning. And your functioning becomes more and more difficult, regardless, is it a home responsibility with your family, with your children, with your parents, or is it your responsibility at work? So when your reactions really last and got worse and interfere with your functioning, that is a very good sign that you should talk and seek support from mental health professionals. They can help you evaluate the situation and if needed, provide you the support, psychotherapy, medication, or the combination of two, or whatever is appropriate for your situation. Next slide, please. Now, we should not forget that many of us are working, and our work, again, changed entirely differently and profoundly as a result of the pandemic. Many of us are in the frontline work. Many of us first time working remotely. Many of us have to go to the office and our task is different and more, and we are ensuring the continuation of operations. So we have to do much, much more. So our work became far more stressful in a different way than before. So we have to recognize that work-related stress is actually an additional layer to all the stress we just talked about. So it is very important that we recognize that. And there are actually a few steps that we can take that can help us to deal with this kind of a work-related stress and reduce its negative impact on our physical and mental health. First thing is setting boundaries between our work and personal or home life. Now, this is extremely challenging if we are working from home, and many people are struggling with that. But it is a decision. But of course, when emails are and messages are coming at 10 o'clock at night and we feel the need to respond to it, then we cross that boundary. So we have to make a conscious decision that we're gonna separate our work and home life, and that the home life we are going to spend with our family or whatever home life we have, and spend that time to take care of ourselves and do things that we enjoy, do things that will help us recharge and recover. Now, using peer support is another way that can help us related to manage work-related stress. Peers, if we are working, for example, at the hospital, or maybe we are at the fire department or at the police, talking to our peers who are going through the same experience and have a room for venting can be very useful and helpful, getting off that extra steam, but also listening how they are coping. Maybe we can learn useful ways to how can we cope better. Managing our workload is again very important because our work is more and more difficult these days. So realize setting realistic goals is very important because the ultimate goal is never realistic. And to know this is what I can do today, and I'm going to try to take and have that done. and not being frustrated and stressed with the many things that I would have liked done today, but it's just impossible. And that also involves to practicing setting priorities every single day. And finally, focusing on the rewarding aspect of our job can help us and give us that extra emotional boost to deal with work-related stress. Whatever your work is, if you're working at the hospital, you are saving life. If you are delivering food for people who cannot or are afraid to go out or have no time to go out, you are also providing essential life-saving services. Next slide, please. And if we don't do this, if we do not reflect on how stressful our work is, and we do not implement these preventive steps, we are going to face the consequences. And this is burnout and compassion fatigue. Burnout is really a reaction to being overworked and overstressed and not taking care of ourselves. And it is a serious condition because burnout is really no other thing than a chronic stress. And if we are not addressing it, what will the result of this be? That we become disengaged about our work. We're going to become negative and cynical, what we feel about how important is what we do. We're going to experience all the signs and symptoms of stress, but constantly, increasingly, at the end, we will not care about our work. And if you are a fireman, if you are a hospital worker, a nurse, or anything, any service in a hospital, or if you are a mother or father taking care of your children, and you don't care about your work, that is not a good thing. This needs to be prevented. And if you don't know how to deal with it, seek the help of the mental health professional. If you are providing support to people who are traumatized by the experience, and your work recover a high level of empathy and engagement with people who are traumatized, you may suffer from compassion fatigue if you forget to take care of yourself and take time for yourself. And when you are providing this kind of a work and you care too much about your work and you are not differentiating between your role life and your work life, in that case, you will suffer from compassion fatigue, which means that at the end, you will not be able to provide the helping support and help you were supposed to. Next slide, please. So what is self-care and why is this important? Now, we're going to pivot from talking about stress, all this negative potential impact, and look at the things that can help us. Self-care includes all the actions that can help us to reduce the stress we are experiencing, to mitigate its negative impact on our health and functioning. In short, self-care is really the best tool available to us all, regardless who we are, where we come from, what is our job, what we do every day. It is our tool that can help us to manage all the stress in our life, all the stress related to this pandemic, basic stress, cumulative stress, traumatic stress. Next slide, please. So what is really involved in stress self-care? There are, I'm sorry, can you go back just one slide, please? Yes, this one, thank you. Self-care really involves three main strategies: self-awareness, monitoring, and management. What do we mean by that? What is self-awareness? Self-awareness, practicing self-care means that really know who you are. You are aware about your regular, usual you. You know your limits. This is very important because when we overstep our limits in our personal life, in our work life, that is when we end up in that very dangerous zone that we are experiencing high level of stress. Now, we also need to know our strengths because our strengths can help us cope with any kind of a stressful situation. When we reflect, okay, when I was in that kind of a difficult situation last time, I did certain things and that actually helped me out. So I know what my strengths are, and I'm going to use them to deal with the current situation. But I also know my weaknesses. And this is important because if I am faced in this situation and I experience that, okay, I'm struggling, I know that this is a time that I can reach out for help to my friends, to family members, or coworkers. Now, self-monitoring is no different than what we talked about before, that you really know your usual self, you know how do you react to stress, and when you know that when the stress reactions you normally experience when you find yourself in stressful situation, which is now life for many of us, they're starting to change and indicate that maybe there is a time to seek help. And finally, stress management. Stress management involves many different strategies we can engage into that can help us reduce the stress. And I'm going to talk in a moment about different things that we can actually do. But I want to remind you that what are the strategies that can work for us to reduce our own stress, just as our stress reactions going to vary from person to person. We just need to find what are the strategies that fits our best and then embrace them and practice them. Because if you don't remember anything, just remember that stress is there in your daily life. You cannot, many of the stresses you cannot avoid. And the only way to prevent their harmful effect on your health, physical and mental health, to practice stress management strategies every single day. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. So now I'm going to share a few simple tips as self-management, self-care, stress management, self-care strategies. First one, take care of our body. Now, this is important, pandemic or no. When we are active and we are keeping our body strong and fit, we feel happier and healthier. And when we feel that way, we just simply feel that we can cope with anything, any stressful situation more effectively. But what is involved in taking care of our body, especially now during the pandemic? We have to remind ourselves and have to remember to practice all the strategies that can make us, our loved ones, and our fellow citizens safe. Washing our hands, keeping our distances, going for testing, staying at home. So all these part now, new part of taking care of our body. But besides that, taking care of body involves remaining active. Now we can do Zoom classes and doing different things, what we like to do, exercising at home, or now the gyms are open with the safety precautions, we can go to the gym, but there are more simple ways, going for the walk in a park, keeping social distance, and maybe we can invite a friend, and then we have someone to talk to and make our exercising even more pleasant experience. It is also important to try to eat healthy. Now, making healthy food choices can be challenging. Many people lost their jobs. Many people were struggling from the start. Now, healthy choices sometimes can be difficult, but canned foods and frozen foods and making the right decisions within our budget is still possible. To start, we should try to make healthy food choices. And other thing is when it comes to taking care of our body too, and also our emotional health, is trying to build a routine. And I hope that by this time, even though our life has turned upside down, you developed a new routine that can and involve taking care of your body, taking and going for that walk and exercising. Now, staying connected is extremely important all the times, but now during the pandemic, during the heightened stress, is more and more important than ever. Staying connected means staying connected with our family members, friends, and our social networks. Today's social platforms are enabling billions to stay connected. There are Zoom, social hours, tea parties, prayer groups. We have many, many choices. staying connected is important because isolation and feeling lonely is one of the greatest risk factors to develop emotional and mental health issues and problems related to stress. Being alone in this stressful situation, not being able to talk to anyone, can be very, very harmful and stressful experience. And staying connected, remember, it's not just about you, it's about your neighbors. So if you know someone elderly who maybe are not versed in the social platforms, call them, talk to them, make them feel less isolated and alone. Next one, please. Oh, I'm sorry, not yet. I'm sorry about that. So after taking care of our body and our staying connected, other things we can do and we should do to stay positive, because it's a lot depends on how we look at life. With positive look on life, we tend to feel stronger and happier. And thinking positive can help us improve our health and also increase our ability to manage stressful times more confidently. Now, I recognize and acknowledge that staying positive in these days can be extremely, extremely stressful and extremely hard. Not stressful, but extremely hard and challenging. And on top of that, not everyone has that kind of a cheerful personality. But when we have this positive outlook on mind, when we are happy, that help us, that despite of all the things that going on in our life, we actually able to see the good things. And when we see the good things, then we are dealing with the difficult little bit more easily. And there are simple strategies that can actually help us to be more positive and to be a more happy person in our own individual lives. So doing things, something that we enjoy, to give ourselves, to allow ourselves to do something that we enjoy. It can be reading a book, or watching a movie, talking to someone we love to talk, or taking a bath, whatever that is, do it, because it will help you to be more positive about life. And then another thing is spotlighting purposefully the positive thing in your day. Every day, I recommend, before you go to sleep, think about three good things, three things that actually happened in your day that made you happy, that brought some positive into your day. And as you do this every day, you slowly learn that you don't have to even think about this, but during the day, as you go through our day, you're going to focus, actually look for the positive things, good for the good things, and that will really empower you and make you more ready to deal with any difficulties in your day. Being mindful is another strategy to deal with difficulties in our current situation. And this is another way of being connected. One way of being connected is connecting to other people. Being mindful is connecting to ourselves. When mindful, we are not worrying about the future, but we usually do what will happen tomorrow, how I'm going to do my work, how I'm going to deal with my children, or we are not regretting what happened in the past, what we, again, most of the time do. When we are mindful, we are in this moment and we are appreciating the benefit of that moment. When we are mindful, it all depends on us. Its mindfulness can be practiced. We can appreciate the moment anytime, anywhere, where we are. When we walk down on the street and the sun shines and we appreciate that feeling, especially after a long time being and spending in the apartment, in our houses, that is being mindful. If we are eating dinner with our family and we are actually enjoying our dinner and not watching the TV or looking at our phone, that is mindfulness. Mindfulness at that level really means that we make every day, every moment count in our life. Being curious is another self-care strategy. And now during the pandemic, this became even more important. Because what is curiousness really means? It means that we are learning constantly new things. And what happens to us when we are learning new things? We are experiencing that we learn something new. We are capable of something wonderful now. Maybe we learned a new language. Maybe we learned how to use a different IT equipment. Maybe we learned how to crochet. Maybe we learned how to paint a wall. It can be anything. It doesn't matter. The experience of learning something, it gives us the sense that we can do things. And that sense of I can is going to be there when we are facing any kind of a stressful situation in our life during this pandemic, and we have a lot of them. And it can help us to find the right way to deal with that stressful situation. So learning new things, it's not only gives the joy of learning that thing, but also helps us being more effective in coping with stress. And finally, being purposeful is very important. Finding purpose in our life, especially now when the world is upside down, when it's hard to see the future, can be very difficult. But when we find a purpose which is individual to us all, our purpose, our meaning in life is different. But that meaning can give us an extra emotional boost. My purpose may be to taking care of my children and make sure that they come out through this pandemic experience unharmed. My purpose may be that I'm going to visit and talk or whatever safe way is to my elderly neighbors, so they are not going to feel isolated and they are not going to deteriorate because of their experience. Whatever your meaning is, find it. It will give you the extra boost you need. Next slide, please. So when adversity, a tragedy, or other significant negative events happened, such as the current pandemic to us, it tends to change our world in a big way, and it has done. The usual way we think, we thought, do things does not apply anymore. We all experience this. Our world became a scary and unfamiliar place, and we often felt and feel confused, stressed, afraid, and anxious. Resilience is our capacity to manage our own reaction to all these changes that we are facing more effectively and cope with and adapt to our new circumstances better. It can help us to bounce back from this adverse life experience, and it helps us recover from setbacks and adapt to challenging circumstances as they come day after day. By being active, positive, connected, mindful, purposeful, and curious, we become more resilient. Next slide, please. And I want to finish with 2 slides now, where to seek and find help. Because what we talked about how difficult our current situation is. We talked briefly about what are the things that we can do on our own or with help with others to cope effectively and come out unharmed, or maybe even resilient or stronger from this experience. But we also have to acknowledge that none of us, no one, not me, none of us, we are not superheroes. We are not superhumans. And what we are going to can get to us. And there can be a time where we just cannot cope. And there are resources that can help us find the help we need. One of the city's greatest resources, NYC Well. NYC Well is a 24/7 helpline staffed by trained counselors, and they can help you find the need that you might need, the most appropriate support for your situation. They offer their services in different languages, and also on their website, you can find applications that can help you find maybe self-care tools. Next slide, please. Another resource is a New York State COVID-19 emotional support helpline. This is a state helpline, unlike NYC Well, which is available 24/7 every day. This is available from 8 in the morning to 10 p.m. and they provide COVID-19 specific emotional support. And the next slide, please. So let me just now briefly sum up what we talked about. We talked about the different types of stress today. We discussed stress reactions, when they may indicate need for help. And we talked about some simple self-care strategies that can help us become more resilient and cope with the pandemic and its mental health impact most effectively. And with this, I want to thank you all. And if there's any question and any time left for it, I would be happy to try to answer those.
Monica, thank you so much for this presentation. That was great, and we learned a lot. So we'll open it up for questions. We don't have too much time left, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type in the questions and answer section, and then we'll be able to answer it. Yes, we are able to provide you with the slides. We'll email the list of people who have attended, and it'll be a PDF format of the slides, and a recording will be made available, I believe, in a couple days. Give us a couple days to get this all rendered and put on our YouTube page, and you can share it with your community or with the people that you work with.
And also, I just like to mention, until there's no other questions, that the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, we have a speakers bureau with different presentations available. So depending on your needs, if you are representing a community, organizations, and you would like to have presentation on different topics, please reach out to us, and we can see if there is anything that will meet your needs and provide you with additional support to deal with the pandemic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we'll leave the room open for a couple more minutes, but it doesn't seem like there are any questions. I feel like we've answered all of them, and it was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Doctor. And we can, yeah, we'll leave the room open and we'll go from there.
Okay, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you for staying with me, for those who stayed with me. And I hope that what we discussed today will help you deal with this really stressful, unprecedented situation a little bit more effectively. And again, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming and listening. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.